for the remainder of this sitting. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Senator candidate Dr. John Rogers, you're hereby appointed as Deputy President for the remainder of today's sitting. We thank you for agreeing to serve. Thank you very much.
Introduction of bills.
Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move the first reading, the passing of the resolution from the Parliament of Barbados to approve the national policy. No, wrong one. Hang on. Mr. President, I beg to move the first reading of the Sexual Offences Bill 2024.
The question is that the Sexual Offences Bill 2024 be read the first time. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The next the ayes have it. The bill is accordingly read the first time.
Public business, sir.
Public business is now the order of the day.
In the name of Senator the Honorable C. Blackman, Minister in the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Investment. Order number 9, sir. To move the passing of a resolution to approve in accordance with Section 2 of the Special Loans Act, Chapter 105, the borrowing by the government of the sum of approximately Barbados $600 million from CIBC, Caribbean Bank Barbados Limited, Scotiabank Barbados Limited, and RBC Royal Bank Barbados Limited on the terms and conditions contained in the Sustainability-Linked Loan Syndicated Facility Agreement, the main provisions of which are set out in the schedule, the proceeds of which will be used to buy back an approximate equivalent amount in high cost of government of Barbados debt.
Senator the Honorable Chad Blackman.
Mr. President, thank you for giving me the floor. And before I get into the substance of my presentation and the bill, also allow me to join you in offering congratulatory regards to our colleague, Senator Drakes, for her stellar achievement. As she indicated, certainly, like any other doctorate program around the world, it is not easy. But the mere fact that she was able to do that whilst having other obligations, including her senatorial obligations, in my view, really speaks testament to your fortitude and your ability to weather any storm. And for that, I also want to place on record my commendation to you, Senator. And long may you be able to offer your skill set, not just to Barbados. As you said, it's not just for you, but also for the Caribbean and smaller and developing states around the world who must, in my view, benefit from the body of work that she would have been able to create in attaining her PhD. So once again, congratulations. Now, of course, we are here today to treat to the issue of the debt for climate swap for the financing of the South Coast sewage treatment plant. And before I get into the meat of the details, because I will go through the figures and the rates and everything, I want to set a context and sometimes brush up a picture that has already been painted, Mr. President, so that every right-thinking Barbadian and those who around the world are tuning in can understand why we're here, the background to which led us here, the conditions in which preceded this administration, and therefore the importance of this bill, but also the success that this administration, notwithstanding the difficulties that we've had to endure, we've been able to achieve what we've been able to achieve today. Now, of course, there's no doubt, there's no secret, Mr. President, that a lot has been said and continues to be said with respect to debt in our great nation Barbados. And I want to assure the people of Barbados at home and around the world that the country has been reporting, and in particular this administration has been reporting since coming to office, on the debt restructuring that we undertook in 2018 was as a direct result, and I repeat, Mr. President, was as a direct result of the fiscal indiscipline. The fiscal indiscipline, the lack of fiscal prudence, the economic mismanagement under the last administration, and in particular, the Democratic Labour Party administration, which, of course, the people would have voted out in 2018. And prior to us, of course, taking office, we would have had to make some adjustments in order to improve the services to the country. That would have been the ideal situation, but they didn't follow suit. May 2018 came, Mr. President, and we know the rest is history. And mission number one became rescuing the economy of this country, not just for rescuing's sake, but so as to ensure that all of the services, including the social services and things that Barbadians are accustomed to, can therefore now begin to work and function in a way that a post-independent nation expects to do. And as fate would have it, we are here today discussing this particular bill. Now, Barbadians would recall, of course, the South Coast sewage plant. I'm a resident, Mr. President, of Christchurch. Christchurch, of course, being the southernmost parish of this country. Christchurch being the home of Oistins. Christchurch being the home of St. Lawrence Gap. Christchurch being the home of our airport, where people from around the world, Barbadians and tourists alike, first encounter this nation. Christchurch, a major point in this country and economy. And we would recall, sadly, and I say this with no pride or happiness or glee, because it forever remains a stain on the marks of a proud nation, that for 3 years, Mr. President, 3 years, which, if my math serves me correctly, and Dr. Drakes, you can help me with the numbers, given your PhD as well, that 3 years is 36 months. For 36 months, Mr. President, this country sadly saw sewage flowing on the streets of Barbados for 36 months. I heard the Honorable Senator from the other side ask if I still with that. As I said, if they listen, and I encourage him to listen, as he always does, is that at the onset of this presentation, Mr. President, I will walk the public through why we are here today with this bill and the importance of the bill, particularly in the circumstances which led this nation to where we are today. So I shall proceed. To the point where it was not only a situation, Mr. President, where sewage was flowing on the streets of our country as a result of a sewage plant that was not working. It therefore led to a number of countries around the world. That's why I said, I say this with no glee or pride. I'm just stating facts and recollection for the history of people who are watching, who may forget or who may not know about the situation. Advisories, travel advisories were issued on Barbados. Because why? They said, if you travel to Barbados, please be aware that particularly in the southern tourism belt of Christchurch, you may run into sewage. It is a fact. So we have to remind the public, but in particular we have to remind the Democratic Labour Party, who oftentimes forget that under this, in Barbados, whenever they're in office, the economic management of this country goes to the abyss. And at that point, it became a major source of shame for our nation. Mr. President, in the month of independence, in the month of our republic, we all know Barbadians are very proud people. Our motto speaks to it: pride and industry. In a country that tourism is the #1 income earner. And it's not just about tourism. It is also to a sense of sanitation and health. It's not just about tourism. We had to endure a South Coast that was awful. When you drove your car through South Coast, whether it be in Rendezvous or wherever, and you park your car, let's say in St. George or St. Thomas, you have to ask yourself, why am I smelling what I'm smelling? This is a fact. I'm not making it up. As I said, I'm painting the picture so we understand why we're here. And it took a valiant and robust response from the honorable member in the other place, Minister Abrams, who immediately after we won in 2018, leading a team and leading government to correct a wrong that was neglected under 10 years of economic mismanagement by the Democratic Labour Party. And within a matter of days, or maybe, 2 weeks, we had a situation where that halted. And I want to once again place on record commendation for the Honourable Minister. Now, having identified it as mission critical, and this is important, ensuring that there was a temporary fix was, of course, looking for a long-term solution, which, of course, now brings us here squarely today, to be able to resolve the issues with respect to the South Coast sewage plant. And for the record, let it be said, of course, that it not only was the South Coast sewage plant that was impacted, but we all remember the large pumpkins, Mr. President. Yes, I said pumpkins, which comes from pumpkin vines, which means things were not attended to, they grew. And of course, we know that those things thrive in that sort of environment. It is a fact. This is the neglect, Mr. President, of the Democratic Labour Party. So yes, I have to remind people, because that's the party which you represent. The mere fact that you can have pumpkins growing in a facility which is not an agricultural facility, Mr. President, speaks to not only the neglect, but the disregard in which Barbadians had to endure under the administration, but they were focused on other things, and those other things were not for the interests of the country. One may argue they were for personal gain, but I move on, Mr. President. So a lot has been said, as I started, with respect to the level of debt, and that we had to do these things coming to our office. And there were concerns, and are concerns, legitimately so, Mr. President, from the perspective of the issue of debt and the numbers of debt. Now, throughout the presentation, I will walk the country through where we were, where we are, why we're there, where we're going, and how do we get there. Now, as opposed to the quality of public goods and public services, and what Barbadians have been able to see as a result of the interventions of this government, I think any reasonable and right-thinking Barbadian will attest to a number of the range of services that have significantly improved post-2018. Certainly, Mr. President. Mr. President, after 10 years, today, listen, Mr. President, I assure you, today Parliament will be the Senate will be one of the most engaging in recent vintage. That I assure you. And after 10 years of Democratic Labour Party neglect, from 2008 to 2018, and an administration that was not under any IMF program, but still had 23 downgrades, our economy and our credit rating, not by us in the Labour Party, but the credit rating agencies around the world, gave us 23 downgrades, down to junk bond status. It therefore meant, for anybody who wants to know what that means in basic terms, Barbados could not borrow money anywhere unless you pay an extremely high and unconscionable rate of interest. Because why? The credit rating agencies gave us 23 downgrades. It therefore meant also, because of the inability and fiscal or lack of fiscal space that we had and the economic mismanagement, garbage trucks were not bought. The same sewage flue was on the streets. Why am I painting this picture or repainting or touching up the picture? It is not Picasso, because this subject is not a Picasso type of painting. But it is one that has to be retold. And therefore, we came to office in May 2018, and we had to arrest the situation and took a tough decision to put the country once again on a long-term path of success and stability. And you know, whenever you have to go to surgery, you're not going to surgery because you want to just cut open the patient. You're doing so, one, to save their lives, and two, to, over time, put them on a path of growth and stability, that they can walk again, they can run again, they can travel again, they can do ordinary things. So the surgery that was necessary immediately upon coming to office in 2018 was as a result of the mismanagement. But I can talk to him today, so I can like. But this reinforces, Mr. President, I come into two. Mr. President, Barbadians must be reminded, and this reinforces in their minds, that when we speak of transformation and wanting to see improvements, it means we have to do things differently. And this is why we're here. Because never again must this country face what we had to go through. Not just about, as I said, about the sewage and the impact on tourism, but the dignity of our people. The dignity of our people. And this is just what, and when we look back on it, this is just but one of the levels of indignity that the people had to endure. Whilst people were flying all over the world on private jets and living large, they just were sucking salt under the Democratic Labour Party. Ordinary people could not go to school, Mr. President. I want to be heard in peace. Mr. President, the Democratic Labour Party, of which Senator Worrell was a member of this House too, at the time, saw it fit in their lack of wisdom to cause Barbadians to have to pay for tertiary education. Don't come.
But how many schools closed today?
Senator Worrell,
Mr. President.
I love your enthusiasm, but not the volume.
Mr. President, sir, as I said, today is going to be a very lively and fun and spirited discussion. And I also encourage those watching online to take note, because whilst there, you know, we may throw a political jab there or here or there, it is an important debate for the future of this country as to where we must go, where we must never revisit, and be mindful that history encourages us and implores us to learn from the lessons that we've encountered. And I really mean that sincerely, notwithstanding the comments. You would recall that there were many a year under the DLP that Barbadians were glued to the Parliament debates, particularly the budget, not because they expected anything good or transformative to come from the budget, Mr. President, but they were of the belief that as they had become known to do, that there were going to be tax increases to service the country's needs. Conversely, and proudly, sir, this measure, this bill today, is the complete opposite, where we are now able to do a major thing, transforming a necessary part of the infrastructure of our country, the South Coast Sewage Plant, and its upgrade and upkeep into a modern facility without increasing the debt. And that is where this debate departs from the history we once knew under the Democratic Labour Party. And this is my starting point because ordinarily, as I said, The last administration did things in a way that to finance things, they tax you. Even to breathe, they contemplated taxing. God forbid. But we are here in 2024, and we have put together through this particular transaction, Mr. President, an opportunity for us to be able to, not just in this case, through the special loans, to issue $600 million. But the use of this $600 million, Mr. President, is now to repurchase existing debt, which some of it is currently now at an interest rate as high as 8%. Now, we are going to repurchase some of that debt in order to reissue at a lower level, so as to be able to finance the upgrade, as I said, of the South Coast sewage plant. Mr. President, the question then becomes, why is it now so important? Because, of course, Barbadians would have heard on more than one occasion that we speak to the fact that there have been this debt situation that the country is facing, and that we had to restructure to create fiscal space. And of course, it therefore meaning the resources necessary to purchase garbage trucks, the resources necessary, Mr. Speaker, Mr. President, sir, to purchase buses, resources to be able to expand the capacity of the same Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Imagine we were under an IMF program and the country found it fit under this administration to be able, Mr. President, to expand the A&E facility and the other facilities that were needed. Can you imagine, Mr. President, in your wildest contemplation, and perhaps even not then, living under an administration of the DLP during COVID? I could only imagine a situation where some of us may be in Coleridge, some of us be in Westbury, some of us be in Christchurch at this point in time. But the point I make, Mr. President, is that we've been able to address a myriad of issues and resources to fix the roads and a whole range of other issues that Barbadians were and are crying out for. And why do I say this? And perhaps it would do others good to understand. Whilst the rest of CARICOM between 2008 and 2018 were growing their economies, Barbados was not. And the one time that it was happening, 0.3 or 4% growth of that year. The excuse that the Democratic Labour Party used at that time, it was about the global recession, the global financial crisis. So in the same circumstances that other Caribbean countries operate under, as small open economies, why is it that this is the only economy that was underperforming in a major way? Why? The answer is clear. Economic mismanagement. Those are the facts. Of course, since coming to office, we had to treat to issues of COVID and other range of things. But of course, I believe when you look at the history, you would realize that notwithstanding that we had to rescue the country, stabilize the dollar, provide for the vulnerable, we were able to have buses on our road. The first country in the Caribbean that has electric buses. The country that has no garbage trucks on the roads, with more to come. Whilst there was total neglect for 10 years, good Lord. Mr. President, sir, if you were, and you are, so let me say if for 10 years you refuse to buy flowers for your other half, do the ordinary things of taking her to a restaurant from time to time, taking her on a trip, providing her basic needs of food, for 10 years. I shan't respond to that, I say, Mr. President, sir. But history would tell us that that sort of neglect wouldn't only cause you to be removed in whatever fashion, as happened in 2018, but there would be severe, long-lasting impact in a negative way on the person who was neglected. Similarly, too, in the relationship and social contract that the Democratic Labour Party had with the country for 10 years, there was neglect. So notwithstanding that they were removed from office, after that removal, there was still a high level of post-traumatic stress and disorder that the country went through. It is a fact. And therefore, Mr. President, the Barbados Labour Party came in with its love and its care and said, look, we understand you give us the vote, 30-0. But we will be the responsible government, and not only will we try to get you on a recovery path, but we're going to have to make some adjustments to get you there. I too, in my own personal journey, I'm doing the same thing. It's my health. I'm a young man, 42 years old, and everyone in the country knows me as a tall, large fellow. But if I want to be sustainable long-term, I had to take a decision that I had to modify my diet, my lifestyle, if I'm going to make it to at least 120, Mr. President. And therefore, I had to make an adjustment, and sometimes it's painful because you have to navigate what you ordinarily would eat, and don't think about it. Similarly too, the country has had to do the same thing. Why am I using these analogies? So that the ordinary person can understand where we are going as a nation and why these things are necessary. And I encourage the honorable members on the other side to also reflect, notwithstanding the asides and everything, because, Mr. President, I know the members of the Democratic Labour Party would admit that they did folly. They admitted, they've apologized, not in the way that they should, but they've admitted that they were reckless and that they were, fiscally imprudent. I get it. But the time has now come for us to rise above the mere politics of it and transform this country. I know that they wouldn't join the Barbados Labour Party, but join us in helping to reshape this country, because they too have children in this country. They too have families and relatives and persons, I'm sure, who want to come back from around the world into Barbados and do business here and to live and have recreation. So this debate is not one, or it shouldn't be, along partisan lines. I'm painting a partisan picture at the onset to set the context, but this is not about Labour, DLP, Independent. This is about Barbados, okay? Now, when we look at the long-term sustainability efforts and the administration's efforts of what we're trying to do, particularly in the context of climate resilience, this bill is going to be key. The climate crisis is one where we all are affected in this region, and we must ensure that we put the country on a long-term sustainable footing to have the capacity to respond to those eventualities. And therefore, you will recall that 2 years ago, we came here and did a debt for nature swap, Mr. President. And let me remind the country also that when we did that debt for nature swap, that all over Barbados, you see the work, of course, of the Marine Spatial Plan taking place, of course, and engaging Barbados. Because why? Our country and our citizens and our residents and those who come here have to be part and parcel of the discourse and understanding the importance of these different initiatives that we're doing, so that there's buy-in. When there's buy-in, people own the process, people understand the process, and it helps government in building out where we need to go with respect to the future of this great country. And of course, the Barbados Environmental Sustainability Fund was also set up. The Marine Spatial Planning Unit was set up, working, of course, alongside the Coastal Zone Management Unit. And all over Barbados, engaging citizens wherever they were with respect to the marine environment, and to be able to put a plan on sustainability so that every Barbadian can understand the asset which we enjoy, namely the ocean. Now, of course, as you would imagine or recall, when we came into office, as I said, there was sewage on the streets. But it was also not flowing on the streets, Mr. President. It was flowing into our waters, into the ocean. And I'm not sure, Mr. President, because I'm not in the mind of anyone but my own, why at the time members of the DLP administration, and I see my honorable comrades laughing, so he knows where I'm going with this, perhaps. But you had a Minister of Tourism under the DLP and one or two other players in the governance ecosystem saw it fit somehow to run in the sea that had effluent in it. Mr. President, that, sir. Because why, as I said, we were confronted with travel advisories from all over the world saying, don't go to Barbados, don't go to the beach. And we had a tourism minister jumping in. You want to save. I understand that something hit him. I don't know if it is true. He was like, you know, but that is for them to know. But that's the picture I paint so people understand where we were, where we are, where we're going, and how we get there. And therefore, people should imagine their role in part of this new moving and building out. Now, why is it so important that this never happens again? The Graham Hall swamp, as we all know in Barbados, Graham Hall Nature Sanctuary, we may call it, is such an important part of our ecosystem and biodiversity. And when we look at the sort of life in that space, we have to protect it. And not only for biodiversity purposes, it's part also too of ensuring that the ecosystem of life and birds and fish and that entire space is also for use for studies, for persons who want to study this. And remember, the country is now repositioning itself to invite persons from around the world to come and study our waters, our beaches, our biodiversity. And therefore, it is important also from that environmental point of view. And of course, whilst I know that Barbados and Barbadians have historically placed a significantly high premium on the focus of the economy and the focus on many other things, we also, in equal measure, have to place, as we've been doing, at the local level, national, regional, international level, a focus on the environment. It is critical, and it is, in my view, a major bread and butter issue for the country going forward. And therefore, when you look at the dereliction that happened under the 3 years, under the Democratic Labour Party, as I mentioned, and where we are now, we must never, and Mr. President, I'm calling on the nation, young people, young persons, young aspirants into politics, not just today, in the future. Let us make a pact with the public through our conscience and future social contracts that never must we be able to say that this is going to happen in Barbados again. It is beyond partisan lines now. That is an issue that must never happen. And I raise that because as we did the Debt Swap 2 years ago, to focus on how we preserve and enhance our environmental sustainability efforts, the fact that we had the sewage plant discharging effluents on the streets of the country, it was a moment of shame that we must never revisit. Now, the reality is that once we are seeking to do this specific intervention, it is consistent, of course, with government's policy in treating to the environment in the same way, as I said, that we would treat to economic development, public health enhancement, and therefore the broader societal development issues. Because why? As a small state, we rely on the state to provide stability, not only for economic terms, but for a peace of mind for our people. You can do business, you go on about your ordinary lives in a state of normalcy. And stability has many assets, of course, but whatever we do onshore has impacts, of course, offshore. And of course, our colleague and sister, Senator Dr. Drakes, of course, who has now specialized and created a body of work in the blue economy, would attest to the fact that as a large ocean state, we have untapped and immense potential lying in our economic exclusive zone. And therefore, we have to protect our marine life. So therefore, whilst we build out, whilst we do different things on land, we must always be cognizant as a nation, as developers, as households, as consumers, what happens offshore, so as to maximize that economic potential for the future of the country. And therefore, this particular resolution today is just a step, in my view, to demonstrate that our policy has been coherent from day one. From day one. I dare to say from day zero, but I would say from day one. And the British Tongue Storage Plant is also being upgraded to the tertiary level. And this is part, of course, of the country's long-term trajectory with respect to the climate resilience effort and fight that we've been treating to for a while. Now, I want to move very quickly and necessarily so with respect to the recent heavy rains that we've been having. And it comes back also to the issue of the infrastructure. Barbados continues, and many countries around the region, continue to face a situation where there are moments at the last minute, high levels and high volumes of rain, and causing issues relative to not just flooding, but if you don't have the infrastructure in the right places to capture the water and its runoff, these things will continue to have major impact. And therefore, the issue of non-revenue water also, in terms of the pipes, not being able to have them fixed in the right way before, the government has been addressing that issue. And therefore, it is part of a broader strategy and ecosystem of redeveloping our infrastructure in water and sewage. Because why? As a country dependent on tourism, as a country with a relatively large population, notwithstanding that the population size is dropping, our society needs water. Barbados is a water scarce jurisdiction. And even though we have lots of rain often, it is not sometimes coming in the way that we need to get the access for the demand on the water. So this debate and this bill, when you take a step back, you see therefore the importance of water governance, which the government has addressed and is addressing. And when you look at then the financing of this entire process, I'm saying to Barbadians that in the same way that the previous debt swap allowed us to be able to use existing debt services, and we are putting monies every 6 months into the Environmental Sustainability Fund, of course, which is allowing the Marine Spatial Plan, as I referred to earlier, and the other stakeholders, of course, to be able to use the interest payments to deal with the marine work. And of course, the milestones as we agreed under that specific transaction. Now, we must recognize and be cognizant of the fact that in order for us to be able to get a new plant that will serve long-term interests, so we're not just doing this for the next 4 years or 5 years, the long-term interests of the country. Now, of course, future generations in governance will have to upgrade from time to time, but we're putting it in a place where there is stability for the long term, not medium term, the long term. And we therefore meant that we had to work with the Inter-American Development Bank. And let me go on record, Mr. President, particularly as a minister who works closely and directly with the IDB, commending them for working with the government of Barbados in helping us to get to where we are today in respect to this bill. And equally, as we did then with the previous debt swap, we worked also with the European Investment Bank on the guarantee side as well. And therefore, as well, focusing, when we look further afield, we have the Green Climate Fund, and of course, in the local banks as intermediaries, so as to be able to execute this particular transaction that we're here treating to today. Of course, we can't wait to another 15, 20 years to upgrade the plan, so we have to do it now. Because one, there was a dereliction of duty, but two, in the ordinary course of things, even if it were not so, we would still have to treat to and upgrade it. So now it was almost like a double effort that we had to place with respect to where we are. And therefore, we've entered into an arrangement where the savings of this particular transaction that we will see over the course of the next 20 years. And Mr. President, permit me to give you a bit more of the details now, particularly with respect to savings. These savings will approximate to roughly about $150 million US. And therefore, over that period of time, if we borrow the money up front to build the plant and the related infrastructure, and the use of the savings so as to pay off the capital loan that we are going to incur from the IDB, as well as the GCF in part, then in fact we would not have increased the debt at all. The total debt service, and this is important, the total debt service would mean that we've been able to redeploy. Now, if we did nothing, and we did nothing with respect to this transaction today, the debt is going to be paid, and it will continue to be paid. And if we wanted to build a plant, it would mean, therefore, that we would have to now go separately and borrow money specifically to do that. So why am I making this distinction and importance, this clarification? Why is it important? Simply because we wouldn't have a pool of money set aside to do so. But now we're in a position to redeploy the existing debt in a way now that we are almost, well, not almost, at zero. So we're getting a new facility under existing numbers and debt, getting the benefit of a new plant whilst not having to increase the debt. Never in the history of our country have we been able to do something as creative in this context. And I want to commend the party of which I represent for being able to do so. So, the specific arrangement allows us to do a couple of things, Mr. President. We buy back the debt at a cheaper interest rate, 3.25%. I'll go through the details, of course, a bit later in terms of the term sheet of the transaction itself. But I'm saying to the country that as we do this buyback at a cheaper interest rate, we will at the same time, in order to construct the plant and other infrastructure which is related to it, for example, mains replacement, for removing, of course, water for agricultural purposes, as well as some of the PV facilities, as well as being able to do that, we'll be issuing in terms of borrowing from the IDB, the GCF, the upfront capital costs to actually build the plant. And the savings will finance the repayment of that loan so that when you look at the overall debt structure, Mr. President, for the country at the end of the transaction, the country would not, as I said, have incurred no debt. Now, once we're able to tender this later this month or perhaps early December, we will be issuing the tender for the contractor to start the work. In other words, Barbadians then can be assured that once we get through this process, by the end of the month, which is literally next week, or in early December, work will start once the tendering process and everything is completed. Which is why we need the transaction, therefore, to be completed within the course of the 18 months, 2 years. We would have a functioning tertiary treatment plant at Graham Hall, serving, as I said, the long-term interests of this country. And of course, as I said again, we would have done so, and I say this so that it cannot be said or alluded to that it was not said. We are doing so whilst not increasing the debt. I shall repeat it. We are doing so whilst not increasing the debt. And it has been long in coming, of course, with respect to getting to this stage, but I believe that this is the best deal that we could have achieved in the relative short term. And this particular transaction is significant because the truth is, confidence has returned to Barbados, both in terms of local investment, foreign investment, local agencies, foreign agencies. And the country has been meeting our targets. Recently, the IMF was here a couple weeks ago, and it's of course not public knowledge, but they've said, they've gone on record, that the administration has not only been meeting the targets, we've surpassed the expectations. I remember this was a homegrown strategy led by the administration. And every indicator from every part around the world is commending Barbados and is now being referred to as the Barbados model within the IMF. And of course, the IMF today is not the IMF in the 80s, 90s, where there was significant draconian measures, where administrations had to look down at gun barrel. The institution has a different complexion, of course not perfect, because that's why there's a need for the reform of the multilateral financial system, hence the need for the Bridgetown Initiative. But Barbados is taking a lead in shaping how these things are played out in the interest of our people. Because why? Again, that reference point of May 2018, the people of this country made it clear, we will give you not just a chance, but we will give you the opportunity to correct the wrong of 10 years of neglect and to take us forward to prosperity. And we are in a circumstance, we are now in year 6, after 10 years of neglect. We're now under an IMF program, which comes to an end next year. We're enjoying 14 consecutive quarters of economic growth. Foreign investment is high in the country, tourist arrivals are high. We're now having air services agreements with many different partners. The economy is growing, the confidence has returned. And therefore, that is why the public of Barbados is continuing to stay with the administration, because they know that we are fiscally prudent, as we've always been since independence. The Labour Party let it state, and my colleagues would bear testament to this, whenever the Labour Party is in office, the economy is stable. But why is it important? And let me make a quick departure there. Economic stability and prudence isn't just about saying the numbers are good, credit rating agencies are saying this. You cannot have, and you meaning one, a country cannot have a strong social program without economic prudence. Because then what happens is that you start to cut here, cut there, do things because things aren't adding up. But we've been able to do all of these things, stabilize the country during COVID, treat the issues relative to the ash fall when it happened, was under an IMF program, and still being able to do the things under very tight circumstances that ordinarily should have been done and must have been done, but they weren't, during 2008 and 2018. And the government has been focused, of course, on ensuring that the structural matters that Barbadians have been agitating for, and it's taking time for different things. But as I said, 10 years of neglect you cannot fix in a week or a year. And therefore, as the world changes and the global geopolitical reality is way worse than it was in 2008. Because in 2008, we talked about the world's financial crisis, but COVID made the global financial crisis pale in comparison. But yet, we were able to do all of these things, can you imagine? And I would encourage the honorable member, the senator, my colleague, to join me in praising this administration for the stellar work that it has been doing. So I call on my colleagues to please join me in the accolades to the administration. But most important and seriously, Mr. President, we have had to work with 3 banks. CIBC Caribbean, Scotiabank, and of course, RBC. And those 3 will participate in this buyback. CIBC, just to go through some of the figures with the public, if you, Mr. President, and the public, CIBC will purchase up to 360 million of the 600 million that we are trying to buy back. RBC will purchase 140 million, and Scotiabank 100 million, roughly. Now, this is significant, as it is perhaps the single largest transaction that the government has ever undertaken. And therefore, in order for us to be able to scale and achieve the type of savings that we know that we can do with this type of transaction and deal, and to get to the mission critical component that we are set out to do as a political party. And therefore, the reality is that the critical step in bringing a solution to a problem that was plaguing this country for 36 months. I believe that notwithstanding the fact that we were interrupted during COVID on a range of other matters as well, that we can say that we are on course for correcting this wrong and many other wrongs that we've had to endure. And around the world, countries place significant premium on the importance of sanitation and health. Of course, you have law and order right up there, education. But you can have all of the growth, you can have all of the development, you can have all the tourists, you can have all the international business. But if your health and your sanitation and your environs are not clean, let's park tourism for a side for a bit. Our citizens of this country deserve a clean environment. That's a fact. And therefore, every administration in this country must be reminded that it is an obligation to do so and to create the conditions that you're able to provide that assurance to the people. All right? Now, we know that our mains need replacing, and I'm talking in terms of water. And this government certainly has been putting funding into the Water Authority so as to advance the mains replacement program across the country, and of course we will continue to do so. Now, of course, Mr. President, you will recall all too well that on the southern side of the country, whilst there was sewage flowing, in the northern part of the country, which, and I'm talking about the uppermost part of the northern part of the country, a part of the country that had historically, prior to May 2018, had a long-standing relationship with the Democratic Labour Party, been neglected to the point where, and I want to go through this very quickly, they were experiencing severe and acute, forget severe, acute water outages. And why was that? Whilst others were investing in all sorts of things, themselves included, there was no investment into the infrastructure of water in the northern part of the country. And let the record reflect, and let Barbadians remember that the Democratic Labour Party neglected the northern part of Barbados. Whether you're talking St. Lucie, St. Peter, St. Joseph, St. Andrew. 10 years of neglect whilst people were doing things for themselves. But as I said, Mr. Speaker, Mr. President, sir, I will talk on that another time. And this administration also identified that as a critical mission. And importantly, because of the restructuring of the debt, we were then able to resolve the issue with respect to the water wars being with respect to the reservoirs and putting in new mains. Now, are there challenges that still exist? Of course. But as I said, when you look at where we've come from, where we have to go, it has taken time to treat a number of things, but the people are aware of where we are at. And one thing I must commend this administration, of which I'm a part for, is being open with the public with respect to the challenges when they come as a time. And that is what the people elected us to do. You don't hide things from nobody. You be honest with them. Barbadians are smart people. They're genuine people. They're honest people. And once you can reason with them, they take you into their confidence and they say, you know what, carry on, carry on. And this is where we are today. Now, as I said at the onset, this is not about boasting, or it's not about laying blame necessarily, but simply to remind people of where we are. Because the truth is that everyone in the country knows where we came from, but the time has come now where we must look towards that Northern Star, hold firm to that Northern Star, and ask ourselves, how do we get there collectively, notwithstanding different interests and perspectives. But we've been making sure that the country is now in a position to finance a sustainable set of solutions to bring to Barbadians. But as I said, it cannot happen without financing. It begs the question, when people ask about financing and debt and what are we doing with the debt, this administration is not, or has not, and is not borrowing money to pay wages. It's not doing that. That is the height of fiscal recklessness. It happened under the Democratic Party, fine. We are and have been borrowing money, debt, to build out the infrastructure that was neglected, but also to build the infrastructure so as to build the capacity of the country going forward. We are repositioning this economy to be a knowledge-based economy, an economy that can provide global solutions to the world, where we now retool our young people and our people in the system so as to tap into that thrust of offering global solutions. But in order to do so, we have to build out infrastructure, physical and otherwise, that inherently was there from the 1960s and onwards, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, because modernization is part and parcel of governance of particularly a small open island economy. And therefore, as we borrow, we're borrowing, as I say, not just to correct the wrongs that were there, but we're borrowing to build capacity for moving forward, so as to put Barbados in a position that we can continue to thrive. But thriving, Mr. President, in a way that hitherto we can have never contemplated. Thriving in a way that our sister country, Singapore, a country that became independent in the same year as Barbados, but has a GDP akin, or even perhaps, depending on the day, close to that of the UK. 5 million people, no natural resources, the size of St. Lucia, but being able to prosper in a way that we deserve to. Barbados is a country filled with imagination, creativity, excellent location, now going into a logistics hub, and therefore the time to reorder our ingredients, which are our people, our natural resources in terms of our people. That's our natural resource. In a way that brings Barbados a level of prosperity that we can not only provide for us, but serve as a model for other small states around the world. So as we look at the blue economy, as we look at the orange economy, as we look at the green economy, those new areas now provide for significant levels of economic diversification that this country must now make as its bread and butter going forward. And this bill today is part and parcel, as I said, it's not just a stabilization effort, yes it is in part, but it is about ensuring that the coast, which continues to help to pay the bills. Of course, you have the West Coast, which pays the bills as it were, in terms of high-end tourism, and the South Coast as well. We have to also ensure that the residents of that part of our great nation continue to have a system where they can have access to good water, access to good, clean roads, and not being in a situation where their sanitary conditions are affected. Now, when we look at the access to water, and as I said, the flowing of the stuff on the street, you ask yourself, and perhaps the two honorable members from the other side can answer this, when you had a sewage plant that needed fixing badly at every measure, how then, Mr. President, did it become a priority to build a building for Water Authority at the time? No, it don't make sense. So it shows you the misaligned priorities that were there. But of course, we all know building and treating and fixing a sewage plant does not have the same sort of environs financially as it does, or still, as perhaps my colleague is here saying, as a building can. I say, take it light. Come. How much paper has they got here? Okay. And the record of the Labour Party has been to respond to the very things that ordinary Barbadians require us to do. And the point I'm making here, and I'm making this for the public to understand, the administration under the Democratic Labour Party talked about global financial recession, and the inability to do things, and that is why things were neglected. But how then could you have built that building and sewage was flowing on the street? Who was monitoring the sewage plant under the Democratic Labour Party? I want to ask this again, and perhaps the senators from that side in their presentations can answer, and I also want to hear Senator Worrell, because he was a member of this chamber when that administration was in here. Why did the Democratic Labour Party not fix it? And who was responsible for making sure that the sewage plant was fit for purpose? And why was it not done? Why was it not done, Mr. President? Because they would like to get up in here and distract people and distract those in the outside, because they think that Bajans have short memories. Bajans don't have short memories, Mr. President, sir. You ever engage somebody, I tell you, man, years ago, you do say, you know, I ain't forget. But Bajans didn't forget. They didn't forget, you know. They didn't forget. And I'm here to remind them today. So I'm waiting on the answer. Hopefully today in this debate, I will hear one of the two senators from the Democratic Labour Party. I'm not sure which is the leader of the two, but one of them in their response will give the answer. Co-deputies. Mr. President, sir, this administration is not going to shy away from the responsibility, because our record is second to none. Second to none in this space, first of all, when it comes to the management of this economy, Mr. President. This administration is second to none, and I look to my colleague to my immediate left. This administration is second to none when it comes to the issue of energy. This administration is second to none on the issue of what? Transportation. It is second to none, and very shortly, and I want to hear them come up now because they have a lot of talk. Huh? Thank you. So the point is, this administration, notwithstanding the difficult measures that we had to undertake from day zero or day one, depending on how you look at it, notwithstanding that we had to go to an IMF program because of the neglect of Senator Worrell's party, we are here today enjoying growth, stability, investor confidence, local and from foreign, and being able to put this country on a long growth path, notwithstanding that there are those who were voted out but have access to large levels of resources, whilst people in this country are trying to make it day by day. Don't come. I don't mean you, Mr. President. I'm here at your leisure. No, but, and the government came to this resolution on the issue of buying back the debt for a purpose. And that purpose, Mr. President, sir, is to really ensure that going forward, one, and allow me to outline these points to you, Mr. President, we don't have the sewage flowing in the streets as it was before under Senator Worrell's party. Two, that we don't have the sewage flowing into the Graham Hall swamp under the other senator's party, my good friend. That our nature sanctuary, perhaps the only place of that type of wetlands and environmental beauty in Barbados. As a responsible government, Mr. President, we must explain that the things that we're doing to improving the lives of people. And of course, you can't improve anything without sometimes some sort of disruption. As I said, change and progress comes at a price, and not just a physical or a numerical price, but dislocation. I remember as a youngster under the ONAFA administration, of which you are part, Mr. President, you would go from 6 Roads to Newton, and you would pass through St. Patrick's, and the road was being redeveloped. And the people were calling for the call-in program. Oh Lord, the road got dust. I can't do this, you understand? But when the road was done, people were happy. Because why? They now not only saw, but they felt the benefit of the change. And the point is, therefore, that as we go through transformation and change, dislocation will come. But now we are in a situation where you can see the benefits. As I said, Barbadians are right-thinking people, as we've seen them demonstrate time and time again, and in particular 2018 and 2022, where in my view they demonstrated their height of wisdom. And we must continue to work hand in hand with them as we build out the country. And as a matter of fact, when you look at the fact that Minister Abrams, whilst people were asleep, as I said, rescued and faced head-on the rescue mission of the sewage plant, and also focusing on Bridgetown, whilst others were asleep, as I said, when Minister Abrams was fixing it. When the DLP was in office, they were asleep on the job. And it led us here today. And for 3 or 4 years, as I said, in the north, they did nothing. They did not lay a pipe, not one single pipe. Can you imagine? They did not lay a single pipe in the north of the country. Did they build a reservoir, Mr. President? No. Did they clean a well? No. They did nothing, but now want to pretend. And this is the hurtful part of it. They now want to pretend as if they are now a bastion of messianic wisdom on high, to come and lecture a nation and an administration that took and put our hand in the proverbial mess that they left, no pun intended or every pun intended, and cleaned it up, went to the international community and said, here is where we are. It is shameful, but we were elected to lead, notwithstanding the mess that our former administration caused. And we went institution by institution globally, country by country. And we didn't go, Mr. President, as it happened under the administration where people would go to meetings, and when they turn on the microphone, people get up and walk out. Barbados, no. And Senator Cummings can attest to this. You, Mr. President, can attest to this. My colleagues on this side can attest to this. The Honorable Senator can attest to this. When you travel the world now, Barbados is seen as not only a model, as the model for governance. And a country cannot stay, and let me address this issue as well, because those who come to equity must come with what? Clean hands. Barbadian government personnel, ministers, had to and are traveling around the world to ensure that our voices are not only at the table, just to make up a number, but to influence the decision-making process, to influence the process of reform that is necessary in the international financial community. Because why? The current institutions, and I hope that Senator Worrell can engage me on this level of debate, because this is a serious level of debate. Join me at that level, my friend. Because why? The context of international reform requires those of us who came to public life from ordinary beginnings to agitate on behalf of the average Barbadian at the global level, Mr. President. Because why? That is where it makes a difference if you, as a country, are categorized as a high income, middle income, or low income jurisdiction. Matrices that bear no fruit, in my view, and the government's view in today's reality, where we have inherent vulnerabilities. So you can't stay in Barbados and do it. You have to go and engage. And these things that we've been able to do have been the constant agitation and lobbying and persuasion that this little country, a powerful punch. And it's in our day, I get up in here in the Senate and talk about it all the time. A young man then, 17 years old, from Baylan, now one of our 2 living national heroes, Right Excellent Sir Garfield Sobers, punched above every weight and created his own weight class and became and is, to this day, the world's greatest cricketer. Rihanna, our 2nd living national hero, same thing, coming from the other side of Parliament, the other side of town, doing the same thing. It is in our DNA to influence the world, but we don't do it by staying here. Garfield Sobers did not become the greatest cricketer in Barbados. He was the greatest cricketer in the world. It means he therefore left Barbados and traveled and influenced the world. Rihanna did the same thing. Our Prime Minister, Mr. President, and I must tell you, the level of pride that I had when, as ambassador, then a senior advisor to DG and ILO, and different endeavors. When you say, I'm from Barbados, I love your Prime Minister. Mia Motley, God bless Parliament. God bless Mia Amor Motley. Who? I will give him his due, he's a foundation man. Like you, Mr. President, he's a foundation man. But that is as far as my accolades with him will go. And the point I'm making is this. The time has come where our country must arrest the situation of how do we fight the continuing global changes in reality. The economic system is changing. New countries are having new allies and alliances. And where must we position ourselves? How do we lobby and go into those spaces to ensure that as the climate crisis continues to bug down on our door, that we have the fiscal space, the policy space, the friends and influence in the right spheres of global governance to be able to deliver on these things, Mr. President. Now, when you look at the transaction before us, and the bill in particular, it will have a long-term impact on the country. And of course, whilst the historic nature of this debate is critical, as I mentioned, I think we can look back on this in 20 and 25 years from now, which is a quarter of a century, to put it in perspective. And we will see how truly transformational this bill and this exercise has been for the country. Because why? It would then mean that we have been able to improve our water authority, more access to predictable water coming through our pipes, the kind of resilience that means that less inconvenience to Barbadians in their day-to-day lives, and helping us to create that future of prosperity for them. And please permit me, very briefly, in my wrap-up, Mr. President, to cite some of the terms and conditions of for the record of the House, which are in the schedule. Now, the facility itself is a fixed rate sustainability linked loan. Secondly, and importantly, the facility arranger is CIBC Caribbean Bank. The lenders, CIBC, Scotiabank, RBC, and of course I would have given the breakdown as well. And the amount that we are buying back is $600 million. Interest rate, once again, 3.25%. And part of the portfolio, the interest rate, of course, 8%. Another part of the portfolio, 4.75%. And another part is 4.25% that we're targeting for the buyback. Now the term is 20 years with a grace period of 5 years and 3 months. And its maturity, we're looking at October 2044. And the repayment of 1.67% of the disbursement of each quarter. Okay? Now, what this effectively means, Mr. President, is that if we did nothing right now, and that for 5 years and 3 months previously mentioned, the government of Barbados would have to pay the existing debt, which is already at a higher interest rate, but must continue paying the debt service. Now, given therefore that we're undertaking this, and particularly if we're able to meet our targets, given the fact that we are able to meet our targets under the fund program and other programs supported by CAF and the IDB, the confidence and the fiscal management of the country that we now obtain has therefore now led us to know where there is an appetite. Colleagues, I want you to remember, if we had tried to do this in May of 2018 or March of 2018, you wouldn't even get past the reception far less the secretary to get into the office to talk to the decision makers, Mr. President, at all. Because nobody had confidence in the government of Barbados at that time. And I understand why there is now that somehow, and Mr. President, very briefly before I take my seat. Sometimes when you listen to the public discourse on the issue of debt, it is akin to a person coming and destroying your house before. I know that others have come and given you a new brand house, driveway, air conditioning, nice fence, trees, plants. You see a person that live down your house, no one to come and park in front with a big backhoe until you give them a chance. To do what? No. And let me go through very briefly some of the commitments that the government will undertake, predominantly through the Barbados Water Authority in relation to the transaction. You may recall, of course, I mentioned the savings. That was $150 million US, the cost of the plant, the laying of the pipes. The PV facility should come to approximately $110 million US, and at most $120 million US, with the $10 million US in contingency. We agreed, of course, that once the plant is completed, and we know exactly where we land, where those extra savings come in would be some of the eligible resilience measures that the surplus can be used for. For example, investment under the South Coast Reclamation Project, including the pipelines for groundwater and recharge areas, the groundwater recharge facilities, the installation, Mr. President, of the solar panels associated with the battery energy storage, environmental monitoring and management programs at the Graham Hall wetlands, which of course will be pre-financed through an investment loan facility, the non-revenue water intervention, of course, which means basically fixing the leaking pipes, and such as restructuring and rehabilitating the water network, improving the pressure management, leak detection, network repair, equipment and asset management system purchases, and satellite data, and a whole list of things. Now moving on to some of the resilience commitments. Establishment of a water resilience steering committee, improving wastewater infrastructure, basically, of course, the development of a water and sanitation master plan that will have a 30-year horizon. As I said, this is not just for now. What is remarkable, or what all of us are debating here today, is the long-term and longevity of this bill that will outlast the life sometimes of many of us and many who are living today. So this is a seminal piece of legislation that we're contemplating here for the benefit of our country going forward. Issues relating to physical planning and development, of course, the sludge management strategy and a roadmap for its implementation, the development and investment plan to improve the wastewater infrastructure of the country, the reducing of non-revenue water losses, as I mentioned, the evaluation of the implementation of improving actions relative to the performance, environmental and social management planning as part of the upgrade for the South Coast, and the groundwater monitoring and management systems. As I said, Mr. President, this transaction is an effort by the government to be responsible in the context of the financing and the intervention of a long overdue resolution as expected and demanded by the people of this country. And when you look at how water and sanitation was treated under the last administration, it has been nothing short of scandalous. And this government, from inception, has put focus on finding a resolution to the sewage issues in a long-term way for this country. And the fact that this government was able to find a temporary fix in circumstances where we still had other major issues to treat to, it therefore tells a story of the commitment of us as an administration to put the issues of Barbados squarely on the table. And it has taken, of course, us 6 years to get here in relation to the financing. And let me say from the beginning that the government, whilst trying to fix the temporary solution, had its mind on all of the other areas that needed critical focus. As I said, there were no buses, there were no garbage trucks, and the last government chose for 10 years to ignore the plights of Barbadians, whilst many within their bosom focus on themselves, some even running afoul of the law internationally. And we have taken our time to work with our international partners to bring this solution to the country. And each occasion that you see the government borrowing the money, it is to build the capacity of this country. Because the truth is, when we took office, most of the money from, and I'll get the figures, particularly for my wrap-up, most of the money that we had in terms of borrowing under the Democratic Labour Party, of every dollar that we earn, most had to be paid back in borrowing. Now it is a situation just 35 cents roughly. It's to service the debt. Okay, so we've seen a transition. And I just want to encourage members as we debate this bill today, ask yourself, how can we ensure that as we contemplate this, that we move the country forward in a way that puts Barbados squarely on a firm footing, not just now for 10 years, 15 years, but the next 30, 40, 50 years, Mr. President. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Blackman. Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I rise to make a contribution in this debate with regard to the resolution. Well,
Sorry, Senator Warren, just a moment. Senator Blackman, just procedurally for the record, just move that the bill be read a second time, please. Resolution. That do not pass, sorry.
Mr. President, I beg that the resolution do not pass.
Thank you very much. Senator Warren, please continue.
thank you, Mr. President. And I rise to make a contribution in this debate with regard to this sustainability-linked loan syndicated facility. I really listened carefully to the introductory remarks by the Honorable Minister who led off the debate. And to be honest, I was hoping that he would shed some more light for the people of Barbados on the terms and the conditions of this resolution, and possibly speak more to the resolution as